Good morning. May call it also a good Yontif. It's the anniversary, the 14th of Kislev, the anniversary of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. And the day that the Rebbe said is this day bound me to you and you to me. So special day. And we are learning and reviewing the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. We are on page 1421, where he was discussing, the Rebbe Rashab is discussing the different levels of oisius to explain the idea of b'chol kavanose, b'chol koach, the whole kavana. When you say Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba, the great name. So he said that's connected to that kol hamayirich be'echad, one who extends and lengthens the contemplation on echad, is marichan le'yom v'shnesav. So that began, the discussion of that began on page 1417, and with that he went whole discussion to understand Shmoi. What is the meaning of God's name? And we see so often we speak about God's name. Ata Kadosh v'Shimcha Kadosh, Ata Echad v'Shimcha Echad, and V'Achal Nivra Elam Hayahu Shmoi Bolvad. What is the Shmoi in addition to the Hu, the name of God? So he explained that a name is made up of letters. It's a form of expression. Letters are expression. Went through the whole discussion. First, the example, the human example, how we have letters. The letters are letters of speech and thought and bina and chachma, and all the way to the hidden faculties of ratzon and tainug, desire and pleasure, and all the way to the etzem nefesh, in the core soul. So too above, you also have the dibur, the speech of Hashem, His thought, faculties, attributes, all the way to before the tzimtzum. And there he discussed before the tzimtzum also we find oisius, the goal of Gelifa b'tehiri Allah, the oisius that are engraved, that when God envisions existence. And he went all the way to Shmei HaAtzmi, God's capacity, Yechelis, Hayu Shmei Bolvad, on top of page 1421, that is the capacity to express himself, and not just to express himself, capacity to have the capacity, like we said, the concept of the concept of the concept, until actual Shmoi, there's an actual name that you could call God, call him by a certain name, and therefore draw forth the attributes that godliness can manifest in. That's briefly what we've learned. Before continuing, we decided we're going to go back to volume 2 in Ayin Beis, which we began learning on Friday, the previous class, namely page 968. That's where we began. We reviewed a few pages before that, but we're really learning inside. We're learning at the bottom, we're at page 968, where he discusses in more detail this concept of the 10 hidden spheres, and especially the concept of names. So there's a little more detail there that could help us understand what we're learning here. So we're just going back to that to help elaborate and expand upon the concept of name and names, both plural and individual, as we discussed. So suffice it to say that the very concept of a name is the power of expression. Then there are levels of that expression. It could be all the way an expression, a tangible one when you write words or letters. It could be a tangible expression through speech, through thought. And then the more sublime levels, all the way as we go back from the bottom up or from the top down. But where does it all originate is God's capacity. And that's what he said was Hu Shmoi. Who would be the essence, and Shmoi would be his capacity to express, to manifest, to become to the level of awareness, experience. Essentially, existence as we know it requires some form of presence, whereas an Atzma's presence is not even a virtue or attribute or a concept altogether. So we're going to go back now to page 968. If you want to follow along, I'm almost sure that we have the pages uploaded at ayinbeis.com, But if not, if you don't have the book, then just I'll of course read it and explain it. So it's not necessary. It's up to you. If you're able to access it, great. If not, as I said, all will be understood. So what we learned on the last class, speaking about how a face is reflected in water, so too one heart is the heart of a human is of Adam, Kain Leva Adam La Adam. The heart of Adam is reflected in another Adam, another person. So he's explaining that also above, that our heart, when we reach out through our work, that initiates something, and there's a reciprocity, just like the reflection of a face in water, there's a reciprocity from above. But then, as we learned, there's also the other way around. Where did a face come from in the first place? So that is because God envisioned the Aveda that we're going to do, and that's why he went ahead and created a structure called a face in the first place, a Pnei Adam, as we learned. So in other words, it's for God's envisioning, like a father would imagine what his child is going to look like, and that seer creates a seer Adam, which ultimately will evolve into an actual human being, but also through holishtalshlus of the spiritual archetype of a human being. But it all begins from that highest level. So he's describing that level, the highest level, where there's a structure, so-called a concept of a structure at least, is the 10 hidden spheres, and that is the ponim Eloyin. Yeah. And then we began learning that the 10 hidden spheres are not a mitzias. They're einam b'chinas spheres, mamish b'chinas mitzias tovar. Like it says in Zohar, lav inu nuhurin. They're not even lights. You can't even call them energies, because the spheres are higher than air. You call them ma'ores, luminaries, source of energies. And even that, he says, is not a source of air, because you can't call it a source even, because it's not a helam, a concealed state that relates to revelation. And he explained there's two levels of concealment. One is called helam sheyeshnu b'mitzias, and one is called a helam she'enu b'mitzias. And the difference is with the example of the concealed flame within a hot coal. So there, it's a mitzias. You just don't see it. And if you fan it, it'll emerge. So its concealment is only relative to the flame that comes out of the coal. But then there's a helam she'enu mitzias. And the example for that is the flintstone. Like he says, Surah Chalomish. Ein bei mitzias eish klal. There's no fire in there at all. You can fan it, you could hold it, you're not going to find any fire. That Koach HaChem, it has the power to release a spark, or he calls it Hachem, power of heat. But he means the spark that will create the heat. And even that's murgish kolchach, and even that power is not really murgish kolchach. You don't sense that. That's where we stopped. So he's basically explaining what we've been learning on the pages that we've been learning in volume 3, the level of the 10 hidden spheres. He called it shemes, names. We'll soon discuss that. Which means a name is not an existent entity. It's just a description. It's saying, like, I've described an archetype, a concept. Until you don't actually, like you say, you call someone by the name, he's a chazdan, he's a kind person. Or you say someone is a chacham, a wise person. You're just describing an attribute. It's not even the actual attribute. So in a human being, obviously we have these attributes. That's why you can call someone a kind person, because he has kindness. And we've seen that kindness. But when it comes to God, God is beyond any form of expression and definition. There's no kindness and there's no wisdom. Nothing has yet emerged. So the first step is that God said, let me create the names. Let me create this concept. The concept of the attribute, the archetype of the archetype, however you want to define it. But bottom line, it's not a mitzias yet. So it's not like the hidden spheres that are like within the coal. There's actual attributes. but the attribute is concealed. And then you reveal it. Like, for example, you have the power to do chesed, kindness, and then you actually give someone a coin for charity, and you've acted on that kindness. Here we're talking about more conceptual or archetypal features, and he's going to now explain it with an example from the human being, because again, Chassidus always example mepsari echzalaka uses human faculties as an example, because our human faculties actually evolve from the spheres. So they're a very good example. They're not just an example, they're actually a type of manifestation of these spheres as they come down below in the human being. So we're going to now continue learning that, to continue understanding this level of spheres above that are not actually there, but they will become what he calls later the source of the source. You say avoiding the word moker because he doesn't want to say it's a direct source, because a direct source would be like the flame of the coal outside of the coal comes from the flame within the coal. There's a direct correlation between the two. Here it's more removed, more removed. So we're going to continue on the bottom of page 968. He says like this: this idea that we're discussing about concealed faculties in contrast to revealed ones, and not just concealed faculties, but the archetypes of the faculties, they're not even a mitzias yet. With example like the Surah Chalamish, the flintstone, like a flame, the spark inside of a flintstone. So on the faculties of the nefesh, who kamoy Koach HaMaskil. This level is like Koach HaMaskil. So let's define what the Koach HaMaskil is. Koach HaMaskil means literally the power to conceive. If we're able to conceive ideas, your mind conceives an idea called Chachma, and then the Chachma develops into Bina, where you elaborate and you comprehend that spark of Chachma in a more broader and an elaborate way. So where's the Chachma come from? It didn't come from nowhere. So it's called Koach HaMaskil. That's the language used in Chassidus. In the Kabbalistic terminology, it's used Chachmas Timah, superconscious wisdom. What some would call the subconscious or the unconscious. That means it's not a conscious state. So what's the relationship between where ideas originate from and the idea itself? The idea obviously has mitzias, because you think of an idea, whatever concept it is, there's a concept. But the Koach HaMaskil, he says, she'ein b'mitzias seichel klal. It's not a mitzias of seichel at all. It's not like a seichel that's hidden, and all you need to do is open the door between the superconscious and the conscious, and ideas come flying in. That's not correct. That would be ideas that you have stored in your mind, in your memory, and when you access it, you want to retrieve an idea that you already have conscious in your mind. So the fact is it's concealed in your brain, and now you're accessing it. Like let's say you learned something yesterday or 2 days ago. So you're not necessarily consciously thinking about it right now. You want to think about it. That would be the seichel is b'mitzias, but it's behelam. Here we're talking Koach HaMaskil, the power to conceive. It's a step before that. You haven't conceived it yet. So he says it's not mitzias seichel klal. I'm reading on. Next page, 969. As is explained elsewhere, what compels us to say that? How do we know? Maybe there is seichel there. One second. Yeah. Okay, he doesn't bring the hechrech actually. He just says elsewhere, he explains what compels us to say that it's not mitzias seichel, even the highest level of seichel. You could say, you know what, maybe it's very, very sublime intelligence that has not yet taken any shape and form, and then when you conceive of the idea, it's taken on shape and form. So elsewhere it explains, he says, the reason for that, if I recall correctly, there's a few reasons given in different Maimorim, how he concludes. Essentially, I think the main reason is because you see, the Koach HaMaskil has infinite possibilities. A mind, at the end of the day, even if we have billions or millions of ideas in our brain, they're all ultimately a number. The Koach HaMaskil doesn't have a limit. If like for example, the flame inside of a coal is not unlimited. It's a flame, it's hot, and it's powerful. And when you fan the flame, the actual flame will appear and emerge from the coal. But we see sometimes that's not enough, and you need to have more coals. Why? Because there's a limit to how much there is in the Helam Sheyesh B'Mitzias. The Koach HaMaskil is going to say, how many ideas can you conceive in your lifetime? The only limit is because we're humans and we only live that long, 120 years, and we only have that much energy to conceive ideas. But the Koach HaMaskil is like a flintstone. How many sparks are there in a flintstone? I mean, unless the stone gets completely erodes or you rub it out completely, the stone can have potentially infinite amount of sparks. I say potentially because actually, obviously, we don't have the capacity to keep drawing sparks out of there. But it's not the same thing as like a Helam Sheyeshrim. Helam Sheyeshrim is whatever you have hidden in your chest, so to speak, or in your closet, you have hidden. But in Koach HaMaskil, it's more of a koyach, it's a power. Just like it says in some places in Chassidus about writing. How many letters can you write? The answer is based on how much energy you have. But the potential of writing letters in your ability to write, there's no limit really. That's one of the Achrechim. And it's not so important here, just since he mentions it, I decided to say it. But Kol Mokim, but still it's called Koach HaMaskil. You don't call it Koach HaRiyah. You don't call it the power to see, or the power to hear, or the power to talk. It's called Koach HaMaskil, the power to conceive. So Makom Mokim ain't a Muslim Megeder Seichel. So though it's not a Metzias of Seichel, but you cannot also negate that it's not the domain of Seichel. It's in the world of Seichel. So ain't a Muslim Megeder Seichel Legamri. Raksha Muslim Metzias Seichel. But you could say that there's no defined entity, substance of Seichel in that level of the Koach HaMaskil. But you cannot say that it's outside of the realm of Seichel altogether. Because like I said, it's Koach HaMaskil, the power to conceive. Just like with let's go back to the Flintstone. The Flintstone, yes, you can't say there's an actual spark inside of the stone, but you also don't say it's a frog inside the stone, or a flower, or some other entity. It's a spark of a flame that can become a flame. So it's in the world of Eish, like he says, Chaim, heat, spark, light. Whereas in the coal, it's also Metzias, except it's hidden. Here, it's mushal from the Metzias, meaning you don't see, it's not an existent entity called Seichel yet, intelligence, but it's also not outside of that domain. So it's already been defined. In other words, Koach HaMaskil is not the beginning of it all, because where's the Koach HaMaskil come from? As we have learned and probably will learn, comes from the Nefesh. The Nefesh has other Koachas too, not just Koach HaMaskil. It also has the Koach of, like I said, the Koach HaChesed, the power to love, the power to the power of Gvura, power of strength or restraint. So it's not mushal from Geder HaSeichel Legamri. Aval Makom Mokim hu Inyan Sichli. So at the end of the day, it's still an Inyan Sichli. It's in the domain called Seichel, and from there Seichel comes. Ma'aches shekfar hu b'chinas hamshochel liyas mokel l'Seichel. Because there has been hamshochel called Koach HaMaskil. Hamshochel, that it should be the source of Seichel. Again, source, not direct source as in something like the flame within the coal, in contrast to the flame outside the coal, but at the end of the day, it's the source because Seichel comes from there. All ideas originate from the Koach HaMaskil. So you have here a good example. This is one of the things that benefits of learning this, to what we learned back when we're up to an Ayin Beis volume 3. Like I said, we're constantly looking for examples, because since we're tangible human beings and we relate to tangible things, so as soon as we talk about the intangible or the invisible, it becomes harder for us to wrap our head around. That's why these examples are so critical. Because it's easy to talk. You could just say, there's Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, Lid Ma'alam Aleis HaRotzen, Shmoi, higher than Shmoi, Yechelis. These are words. But when you find examples in some way, operative examples in our life, like here, Koach HaMaskil, you see. So Seichel it's not yet, but it's also not the Etzem, meaning it is already Hamshacha called Koach HaMaskil. So there is an entity called the power to conceive, but it's not Metzias HaSeichel. So therefore, it says like this, Koach HaMaskil there's Hamshacha. I don't want to yet compare this to what we learned about what level is this, the level of a name, the level of names. We'll get to that as he continues. Like I said, learning this always opens up the door. Okay, let's understand this. But we're not coming to learn now this piece in Ayin Beis. This piece in Ayin Beis is only an addendum in order to help us understand what we're learning in HaSechel Gimel. So let me just make that clear. If you really want to go into what we're learning, what we're learning right now, I would suggest learning it outside of this class, and you can always go back to my classes that when I taught this back, this would probably be around probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, who knows how long, 5 years ago. I'm not even sure how long ago I taught this piece. But so I'm sticking to just learning this in order to explain what we're learning in Ayin Beis Chelik Gimel. Okay. Ulechein Koach HaMaskil nirgish mitziyusei. Moishekasa b'mokam acher. And that's why you can sense that there's a Koach HaMaskil. Now, qualified. He says mitziyusei. He just said before it's not a mitziyus. It's not a mitziyus of seichel. But it's still a mitziyus, an existing entity. Like I said, it's an entity of the power to conceive. Now, what means nirgish mitziyusei? So we never will feel the supraconscious, but we feel it comes from somewhere. When someone says, where did that idea come from? You can't identify exactly where it came from, but you could sense that it came from somewhere. It's not like a complete miracle. In other words, it came from somewhere, you just can't identify the location, so to speak. So there's the niggush, the Koach HaMaskil, that a person has the ability to sense that they have the power to conceive. And one of the best ways to prove that is very simple. If you have a dilemma or a problem, and you may have no solution right now, and someone say, what are you going to do? You'll say, I have to think about it. You say that all the time, right? Let me give it some thought. Let me consult. Let me review it. Let me sit on it. What are you saying, essentially? You're saying, I have the power, I know, to be able to think of ideas or conceive of ideas. I just don't have an idea yet what to do here. So we all know that we can access, if you concentrate enough, you can't conceive of ideas. So your margish, the mitzias of it, not the mahus, its personality. And you can't identify what it looks like exactly, but everyone feels that we have certain abilities, even if we haven't actualized those abilities. And I don't mean actualize as in a concealed idea again. We're not talking about an idea that you already have and you just have to retrieve. Like sometimes we'll say, oh, I remember the answer to that question, let me try to remember it. And then you do this, you think, you go into your memory banks and you retrieve the concept. Here we're talking about, the idea is not there yet, but you have the power. You sit down and learn. So any person with some intelligence knows they have enough intelligence. I don't maybe not figure it out yet, but if I work on it, you guide to mitzasi, I strain myself, I exert myself, I will come, the Koach HaMaskil will be activated and will ultimately deliver something. Whether it's a correct idea or not is another story. So the point is that there is something there that you could talk about. And this is all the Rebbe Rashab is coming to explain the difference between the Sefiros Hagnuzis, the Helam She'ein b'Mitzias. He hasn't finished yet. So we've established now that there's a Koach HaMaskil. Before I continue, let me stop if anyone wants to ask anything. But he's going to go now deeper into the psyche, even higher than the Koach HaMaskil, which he's going to call the Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi. It's going to go a level deeper than the Koach HaMaskil. So we're not finished the topic, but I still would like to stop if anybody wants me to clarify anything.
Just what does Hiuli mean?
We didn't read it yet, so when I read it, I'll explain it. I'm asking if anybody wants what I explained till now.
Can we say that Epiphany came as similar as Yesh Me'ayin?
Can we say what? On what? What are you?
Can we say that Epiphany is some kind of new idea?
Relatively speaking, yes. Relatively speaking, you could say that. It's all relative because Yesh Ma'ayin can mean something a lot bigger than that. But for example, you say Chachma Ma'ayin Timotza, Chachma comes from Ayin because Chachma is already, even if it's only a spark, It's already a spark. Like, would you say that the spark that comes from a flintstone is yesh ma'ayin? Relatively to a coal, yes, but not relative to real creation, because the spark, its existence is not inside the coal, inside the flintstone, but its potential is there. So real yesh ma'ayin is even a bigger quantum leap than this. But relatively speaking, I mean, I'm not clear why you want to categorize it as such, but relatively speaking, it's more yesh and ayin than, like I said, a kol. But there are higher states that are even higher than Koach HaMaskil, as we'll see shortly. So it goes like this now. Aval Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi. So now he's giving us another level. It's calling it the Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi. So let's first define what that means. So there's a few. So let me go back to something a few classes back, you may recall. I spoke about the faculties in several levels. There's the Koachos HaGluyim, which we're most familiar with. That's your actualized, revealed faculties. I'm speaking now. I'm trying to explain an idea. You're seeing an active faculty at work, faculties at work. The faculty of speech, the faculty of intelligence, and the faculty of explanation. So there's a lot of faculties at work here. If you're using your hand, let's say, I'm using my hands now to speak, or I use my hand to write, or I use my hand to throw a stone, or any other things that we do. All of them are active faculties at work, utilizing one or more of the three garments of expression, thought, speech, or action. Because those are always the forms of expression. You could have intelligence in your mind, but you need machshavah to think about it, dibur to speak about it, maisa to act on it, or to write it down. Then there's koachos nelamim. Koachos nelamim means I'm not actually speaking or conveying an idea, but I have the capacity to do so. And I mean capacity, I don't mean yechelis in my etzem nefesh. It's just one step away from me doing so. It's just like if my eyes close and then I open my eyes. The koach nelam of vision is there, and it takes a split second. As soon as I open my eyes, I see. So we would call that the koach nelam of riyah, or the koach nelam of shmiyah, of listening, or the koach nelam of writing, or any other koach. So we have koachos gilui, koachos gluyim, koachos nelamim. Those are very much like the coal. The coal, the flame outside of the coal, the flame within the coal. They're very close to each other. One is helam and gilui. But deeper than that, we call it koachos hiulim. I don't want to use that word completely because he uses it here, but I'm using it intentionally because here he uses Hiuli HaAtzmi. So higher than Koachos Nelamim is like Koach HaMaskil. It's the power to conceive. It's not the actual faculty in a hidden state. It's the power that you have to see. That's already a power of the nefesh, but it's not actualized in any way. The power, and then it can manifest in a concealed way or in a revealed way. So it's a third level, Koach HaMaskil. Then comes the Koachos Hiuli HaAtzmi. So every faculty has, the next level would be the Hiuli HaAtzmi. The word Hiuli is a word that is taken from the Greek, actually. The Ramban was one of the first, I think, that uses it, maybe the Rasag earlier than him. But the Ramban for sure used it at the beginning of Sefer Bereshis. Hiuli is a hard thing to translate because literally it means potential. But potential is a very broad word. A hidden flame in a coal is also potential. So you have to get away from the semantics. Potential means it's completely a potential state. In that school of thought, philosophical school of thought, Hiyulim were seen as archetypes, like an archetype. You say the Hiyuli Eish Hiyuli, the archetype of fire. It's not actual fire, but it's the archetype of fire. And that will later evolve into actual fire, which can be concealed or it can be revealed. That's Hiyuli. Hiuli HaAtzmi is even a higher level. It's saying like the core Hiyuli, where everything originates. The Ramban puts it this way. There are four elements we talk about. Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer. Right? Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer are not just fire or air, water, and earth. That's the physical manifestation of it. It's 4 attributes. It's 4 archetypes. So there's the Hiuli of Eish and the Hiuli of Mayim and the Ruach, Mayim, and Ofer. Then the Hiuli HaAtzmi, he says, is something that's even a potential of the potential, like an archetype that hasn't yet even been shaped into Eish, Ruach, even to the Hiuli of Eish, Ruach. It's like an archetype of an archetype in a way. So he's saying here, Koach HaMaskil is already an active force within us, the power to conceive. It's not Metzias of Seichel, that we established, but it's also not outside. It's still a source, ultimately, where Seichel comes from, and you can sense it to some extent. But he says, Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi. So now you're going even deeper into the soul, where it's not even become a supraconscious state. So it's not even Chochmas Tima yet. It's Hu Mushal Gamri Me'inyan HaSeichel. That's mushal even from the category of seichel, because here it's a complete, complete state, a nebulous state that is in the nefesh, and it's not even become yet the power of conceiving. She'ein b'chinas sichli klal. V'lechein, it's not even the sichli klal. Koach HaMaskil, we know, is in the category of seichel. This is not even sichli. So why do we call it Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi? We'll see in a moment. But he's clearly saying it's even a deeper level. Now, if you recall, when we learned about this in the volume 3, I explained that once you go deeper into the nefesh, there's a place where the nefesh is just the nefesh has the power to give off seichel. So this is already that power, but it's not yet the power of seichel, that the power to conceive of ideas. It's just the power of seichel altogether. But it's not even seichel at that point. That's why he's saying it's mushal legamri from the concept of seichel. And you can't call it a makar seichel, where the Koach HaMaskil, you could at least call it the source of seichel. That's where ideas come from. And that's why you can sense that every one of us has the power to conceive ideas. This one, all you could say is hasichlim nimtzayim imenu. So this is a very subtle difference, but Chassidus uses this very often. When you say a makar for something, you're saying it's there, and even if it's removed, and it's not yet a metzias of the entity that's going to come from there, but it's there, and therefore it's considered some form of a source. When you say something is nimtza mimenu, you're saying it originates from there. But you can't call the source, you can't call the original source a source. So yes, in English, technically, it's source there. But there's a source that so-called relates to the thing where the source is manifesting. And you don't call it a source, you just say it emerges from there, which is a very different meaning than something that's a source. An example. You plant a seed in the ground, so we all know the seed is going to be the source, the direct source of whatever that seed is. Let's say an apple seed. And then you see that begin to sprout and grows into an apple tree. You can easily trace, even though a seed doesn't seem possible to turn into a tree like that, but we know it does. Just like one cell that's conceived of a child, of a new fetus, even though it's only one cell, but when it splits enough times, 9 months later, you're going to have a full-blown child, an infant. That's a mokar. That's not something you can't call. It's not. There is a life in there. The life has begun. It's just so concentrated. It's not Helam and Gilui. It's a lot more like the Koach HaMaskil and Seichel, perhaps. I'm using that. I'm not saying it's exactly like that, but just in this context. But then there's the concept, the power to conceive. The fact is, God created a human being, the male with the power of a seed that can fertilize an egg. So even though the conception hasn't happened, but you could say they have the power to conceive. Can you call that a source? So of course, it's the father and mother that will be the parents of this child. But you can't compare it to the actual conceived cell where you already have something existent. It's just that it's so concentrated you can't even tell that it's going to become alive. If someone looked at one cell, even a conceived cell, you wouldn't know that this is going to become a child. But here, you're talking about something you can't even call it. It's just, again, it's not a perfect example because they're very hard to find perfect examples for this. But it's just trying to show that as you continue the abstractions, you're going deeper. So you could say it's nimtza mimenu, that the conceived cell or the seed nimtza from the power that is there. Let's say the power of growth within the earth. You're not going to find the power of growth in the earth. You just plant seeds and you water it and you plow the land and you water it and so on and cultivate it. It'll grow into things. So it's even more detached and more removed. You can't call it mocker, but you can call that it's nimtza from there. Because if you didn't have a soul, it's like saying, where does seichel come from in the first place? From your nefesh. Would you call the nefesh the Koach HaSechel? Or you say seichel is nimtza from your nefesh? We're not talking about nefesh here, just for the record. We're talking about the Koach HaSechel. He calls it the Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi, which you can ask, is that the Koach HaAtzmi that we learned about in volume 3? I would say it's a step lower than that. But similarly, it's the nefesh that has the ability to conceive ideas, which in turn will turn into a Koach HaMaskil. But as long as it's in the HaSechel Hiuli, Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi, you could say it comes from there, but you can't say it's a source of it because you don't have a direct link as a source where you already have an entity that you cannot. It's not seichel yet, but at least is going to conceive of ideas.
But it's connected. It's connected, right?
One second. Let me just read one more line. It's connected. What means the word connected is a very.
It's not a direct.
Connected. Everything. God is connected to us too. What does that mean? It's a connection.
No,
everything is connected.
Of course, but there is something. It's not seichel. It's not a shayresh. It's nothing. But there is something there that it's nimtza mimenu.
The Rebbe Rashab calls it not a mocker for seichel at all. He calls nimtzoim mimenu. One second. Let me just finish the sentence here. So, not the Koach HaMaskil. The Koach, this HaSechel Hiuli Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi, this is a Helam she'ena b'mitzias. So initially, I was comparing the Koach HaMaskil to the Even Tzura Chalomish, which is like a Flintstone, but he's not saying that. That Helam she'ena b'mitzias is a higher level than even the Koach HaMaskil. It's the HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi in the nefesh, that the nefesh has the capacity, has the power to so-called create a Koach HaMaskil, which in turn has the power to conceive of ideas. And that's what he calls a Helam. One second, let me just finish my sentences and then we'll discuss. That's what's called a Helam she'ena b'mitzias. A Helam she'yeshn b'mitzias would be the Koach HaNelam, or in this case, like Koach HaMaskil. That's what it appears what he's saying here right now. Okay, go ahead. Who wants to ask something?
I just wanted to ask, it's not differentiated at all from the other koach, or is it actually specifying that it's a seichel, the Koach HaSechel? Is it differentiated or not?
It's a good question, and the answer would be it's differentiated because you would say on chesed, for example, kindness, you'd say Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi. So look, when it comes to, let me ask you a question. In the one cell that's conceived, that will become a child, an infant that will have 35 to 75 trillion cells, would you say those different cells are differentiated in that one cell or not?
Not yet. I mean, potentially there.
Okay, so whatever you answer there, you could answer here.
Mm-hmm. I see.
Because again, language is limited. When you say differentiated, I would think differentiated means an apple is not an orange. I'm sorry, right? And so when you say differentiated, you have to know what you mean by that. That's why I said you're dealing here with extremely high level of abstraction, where things are not yet shaped into defined forms, but that's why we're calling an archetype of an archetype, a concept of a concept. And it comes down to how well you understand that. So I would say the following. The nefesh, we learned even a level nefesh neise. The nefesh, meaning the soul, is not a composite. It's not a murkav. It's not a sum of the parts. A nefesh is a power. Think of it like electricity. Electricity, it can energize anything. A light bulb, a computer, a refrigerator, an air conditioner, or all the other ways that electricity is used. However, that electricity has to travel and now enter into whatever appliance is going to energize. And then you need regulation here. You need to regulate the flow because too much electricity can burn out circuits. On the other hand, some appliances need so much electricity, you better get a lot of, make sure that it maximizes it. But there's a constant flow. Now, it's not a perfect example because electricity is not a faculty, but nevertheless, electricity will ultimately take on some shape and form, even if it doesn't assume those qualities, but it will take on as it begins to energize something. So think of the nefesh as a pure, shapeless, and undefined and seamless entity. Now, that nefesh has the capacity for different faculties, different attributes, seichel and so on. What he's describing here is some of the steps, not all of them even, but some of the steps of how that emerges. So what he's laid out is, we go backwards. Actual intelligence, when you're activated, is called a Koach Gili, a revealed faculty. Behind that lies a concealed faculty, or let's call it here, he's not even speaking about the Koach Snalom, he's called more the Koach HaMaskil, the power to conceive ideas. So there, it's not an idea yet, it's not Seichel, but it's an entity that has the power to generate ideas. Then that itself is embedded somewhere in the soul, which he calls the HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi, Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi, which is from the soul. So you have to understand how do you identify that? So he's saying it's not defined as Seichel at all, and yet that will be ultimately where Seichel comes from, where Koach HaMaskil comes from, and Seichel comes from. So that needs to be elaborated upon, and every one of us can try to understand it differently of how exactly what state that's in. So I'm just trying to describe it with examples that give us the ability to somewhat imagine what it would be like. That's why I gave the example of the cell. This is actually even higher than a cell. But even a cell, it's hard to imagine how 75 trillion cells come from one cell. Is it in there or is it not in there? What does that mean? About a big mighty tree that came from one little seed. So it's concentrated. We understand it's concentrated, but quantity-wise, you can't even compare the two. And the cells are not coming from outside. It's not like in the 9 months, people are delivering cells from different parts of the world so the child can develop. It's all emerging from that one cell. So it's a hard statement to ask if someone says, is it there or it's not there? Is every experience that we have in life, meaning all our faculties, all there in that one cell? The answer is, you said the word potential. But potential is a very, very broad word, can mean 1,000 things potential. Here we're already talking about the potential that relates to an entity, and there's a potential that's beyond relating to the entity. So we could elaborate on this. This is what we've been learning in the volume 3, these different stages, and they are hard to wrap your head around because they're all not so tangible.
So we've talked in the Chelik Gimel, volume 3, that it's like the concept of a concept, or the concept of the concept of concept. I'm wondering, and I'm trying to,
So let me just stop you right there. Even that, you'll get your question. Even what you just said, as we've discussed, is also hard to. How many levels can we conceive of concept of concept of concept of concept? I don't know. I can't go more than, when I start thinking, I could probably explain 5 levels of that, maybe more a bit. But it's not so easy, even to explain the concept of a concept. I'm just saying, I know that's what we've used.
Yeah, I get it. Your point is, it's easy to say, but it's hard to fathom, like in the abstractness of it is very removed. I understand.
Okay,
right?
Go on. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah. So in that regard,
but it does give us a semblance. It does give us something to think about. It's not like Yeah,
No,
it's not-
that's why I'm just wondering in this refined use of the words Koach versus Hiuli, if you could say Koach Hiuli is like a notion or a theory. Now we know it's true. You could say it's a true theory or a true notion, but it's just a notion. Is that I'm trying to distinguish between potential
I
or
wouldn't use the
capacity.
word. The notion is good in the world of seichel, but I wouldn't use notion when you're talking about the nefesh. It's not a notion in the nefesh. It wouldn't make sense to me. I would not use the word that the soul has a notion of seichel. I wouldn't use that word.
So
I would use more the capacity.
okay. So the next question is this
But I know
the
what you mean. Notion is just the same idea as concept. Why is notion different than concept?
It helps distinguish that it doesn't really exist. But that's my next question. Do these koichos or are they b'metzias or not b'metzias?
Define mitzias.
Well,
I ask you,
existent and
the 75 trillion cells, are they mitzias within the one cell, in your opinion?
conceptually. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Okay, so there you
Yeah.
go. You see, that's exactly the point. You know, it depends how you if you define mitzias by the usual empirical sensory tools. Remember the example I give with
Yeah.
the net. If it's a net that has 5-inch space, 5-inch spaces, you're not going to catch fish that are shorter than 5 inches long. It all depends what your tools are. So mitzias is a very, very difficult word to really translate. When he says mitzias here, usually we mean mitzias as we relate to it. Like, you know, this table exists. If I told you there were 20 tables in this room, you'd say, I don't know what you're talking about. There's only one table in this room. That's how we usually define mitzias. Now, when I say, how do you know that? You'll say, because I see it. I measure it. I touch it. So I say, yeah, but maybe there's a conceptual table in the room. Oh, conceptual table? No problem. If that's what you define mitzias, fine. There can be 20 conceptual tables. See what I'm saying? The word mitzias itself is very relative to what
Right,
your
I get it.
definitions are.
Sure, from the way you framed.
I mean, you remember when Bill Clinton said, what did he say? Depends what is, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
One more question.
Well, hold
I
on. Let me
didn't,
just.
I didn't mean to bring an irreverent example, but
No, but I get it. It was
you're a
good one.
lawyer, by the way. You look at documents, contracts. There's always, they say, what does that word mean? We need to know, what do you mean by is? It
How does it
happened.
operate?
What
Yeah.
means happened? So say it happened, you know, because words can be very easily, and I'm not trying to say this to be deliberately vague. It's just the reality when you're talking about these things, the word mitzias, is atzilus a mitzias? It depends. If you look in the world of Asiya, Gashmis, Chumrius, Atzilus, where's Atzilus? How do you define Atzilus? But when you get used to the idea, just like you say, is love a Metzias? Not in the world of tangible, I mean, again, I think you get my point.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
This is part of the discussion. That's why I'm elaborating. And how many times have I said, remember, our point of departure is tangible, very simple. I'm going to use the word simplistic, the tip of the iceberg. Let's be honest. That's where we begin with. We begin with the things that we relate to most. And to be very honest, the more you can free yourself from that, the better you understand Chassidus. Because Chassidus is a journey into the beyond the tangible reality of things. You know? I just said today's Hayom Yom, the interesting thing, he talks about 3 levels of a chassid. So he said the first level that is accessible to all is that the matters of this world shouldn't bother you that much. Now, how's that possible? You know, you lose money, God forbid, health. There's so many challenges in life. The only way it's possible is because you become exposed to a more spiritual reality. So the physical reality is not going to shake you as much because you have more eggs in your basket, so to speak. You have diversified. That's really what it comes down to. Just like when a child cries because you took away a toy or a candy or something, you know, an adult won't cry because an adult knows there's other options. In other words, the broader the horizon, the less you hold on to the things that you usually rely on. So it's like the Frierdiker Rebbe said, this toy can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone with one God and many worlds. So it's really about what was the real ultimate goal of all of this is not to technically figure out what's going on with the Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi or Koach HaMaskil. It's to come to teach us. You're talking about applying this about more sublime states of reality within you and within me. This is not just about heaven. That's really what it comes down to, and that is why there's so much, I don't want to say resistance, but it's so difficult because we're not used to it. And we're trying to enter there. If you take this seriously, it's real hard work. It's not easy. If you wanted this to be cerebral, you're not going to get there too quickly because this is not an intellectual journey. This is very much a personal journey. Obviously, there's deep intellect in all of this. But remember, we're applying our scientific minds here. So if you want to do that, that's why I always tell you, think of matter, elements, molecules, atoms, and subatomic particles, and a little quantum. That's scientific language. But quantum, as some scientists have come to the conclusion, some scientists call quantum mystical. Do you know that? That there are those that call it mystical experience. They described it similar to mysticism. It's metaphysical, even though it's proven science, because it's a reality that doesn't work by the rules that usually, determinism was always the rule. What they call the billiard ball effect. You hit a billiard ball at a certain angle with the same amount of strength, there will always be the same result. Suddenly, you're exposed to indeterminism. What does that mean? That you can do twice the same thing and you'll have a different result. Makes no sense, actually. Not according to the empirical laws of Newtonian physics. And if you go back to the history, it took 10, 20, 30 years for them to debate. Are they imagining this? I mean, Einstein rejected it. He called it spooky action from a distance. How could that be? There are things that just didn't make sense in the conventional, brilliant, even with a brilliant mind, because it's a different way of thinking. It's not just that you're understanding a deeper concept. It's another whole new a whole new paradigm of thought. This is really what Chassidus does. So what we're right now is literally in the fray of taking ourselves, very physical human beings, as smart as we may be, and trying to understand states that are not quite what we're accustomed to. That's really, if you want to put it in, again, this doesn't necessarily answer all the questions you may have, but it definitely primes you to say, okay, so let me figure out how to think about it. You got to think about it differently. The cells for me are very, very vivid because I think of how can 75 trillion cells be contained in one cell? And the answer is very straightforward. It doesn't occupy space as we know it. As simple as that. The question comes from a limited understanding of how we understand space. What means space? Only that many people can fit into this room. And that's that. Once you fill it up, you can't fit more people into it. But that's people, and that's how we measure space in a very linear way. Suddenly you have to realize, 1 second, there's other ways to measure space, and there's other types of space, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you think of, I wonder if we're looking at this from Lamayla Lamata, from God's perspective, which is where we're headed in Chelek Gimel.
I think God gets a good chuckle every time we try to do this.
I'm sure of that, but from his perspective, if he starts to say, "Well, he who haya who hova who yiya," and he sees us before we were born, as we're conceived, and as we live, and after we die, all in one skira, skira achas, and all the potentials of that we could be. Meaning, I could, God forbid, be a Rasha Gomer, or I could be a tzaddik. I don't know about that. But the point is, there could be many iterations of me. God sees all of that in one skira, both past, present, and future. If you think about it from that perspective, and those are all real possibilities. They don't. Is that a fair way of saying it? I mean, in terms of abstraction,
I would not use the tzaddik Rasha, because that goes into a whole new category of free will. I wouldn't go there altogether. But the idea of higher than time and higher than space, there is a level where all time and space comes together. I wouldn't go into free will as a whole other discussion. And for us to understand things that are beyond time, like, for example, that a person can do tshuva and actually go back in the past and change the past, That's part of the dilemma for us because we don't understand fully things that are beyond time and space. I believe in volume 1, the Rebbe Rashab even said that the seichel of a human being, our seichel, is not really capable of fully understanding something outside of time and space. Now, obviously, he means also conceptual time and space. Let me.
Thank you.
You're right
Okay.
about what you
There are
said
other people.
before.
One second. There are plenty. I see a lot of people want to ask questions. So let's move. Anybody else? Go ahead, please.
You said before, you're right about that in space there are different levels also, because you see today with technology that you have so many ideas in a small chip, but there is a limit to that also. You have to change the chip. This is
Okay, of course,
spiritual
because
thing.
we're at the end of the day we're finite. I understand. Of course, we're not God. Yeah.
But these things that we started, that it's so removed that it's only nimtzah mimenu. The way that I understand, because it's nimtzah mimenu, that means it's not a source, but it comes from it, not stam nimtzah mimenu. This is the Eibishter, everything in nimtzah mimenu. But here is
But the nefesh, you also have that. In the nefesh, you also have that. Look, let me ask you a question. When the water we drink, right? So the water we drink comes mostly from rainwater. The rainwater that's gathered together in reservoirs, right? Reservoirs, they builds up all that water, et cetera, delivered through water mains and the pipes that come to our homes. The reservoir, where does rain come from? So the clouds. Where do the clouds come from? From the oceans that evaporate. If you get back to the source, you're going to find the mayones. The mayones are the well springs that are deeply embedded in the earth. Where does water get into the well springs? I don't know if you ever studied this. Why is there water in wells? I'm not talking about rivers now and oceans. We're talking now the root, the source. And you could trace it. You could trace it to well springs that are deeply embedded under the ground. And how much water is there potentially? You said finite. Even oil, people are amazed how much oil can be produced. But let's take water. So if you start studying it, you're going to start finding that the water is formed from the deeper in the earth where there's no water altogether. It's actually tremendous heat. If you go down to the molten rock that's like a few miles down under the earth, you're going to get to places that are almost not as hot as the sun, but comparable. And it's tremendous heat and pressure. And when it all comes together, for some reason, it starts cooling as it goes higher up. One second, it starts cooling. As it starts cooling, it starts becoming watery. Similar like how gas becomes water and water becomes ice, just as an example. Now, if you saw it in the level of that, deeper levels of the earth, would you call that a mocker, from mocker hamayim? Very few people would call it a source for water. You'd say water emerges from there. And as processes that thing, and this I'm talking all physical. I'm not even talking about spiritual archetypes now or concepts or so on. And there, so you'd say, yes, rainwater comes from the clouds come from the oceans come from, and rivers come from the well springs, etc. Combination of vapor and the heat and the cold, etc. But once you start getting to the deeper sources of these things, you don't call them source anymore. You say it comes from there, it originates from there. So you just have to find examples where you can say something is a direct mocker and something is more an origin, if you wish. Even by the way, mocker and sheirish in Chassidus are not the same. Mocker is closer source, sheirish is more of a root, a more distant source. Like you'll say, you got your genes from your parents. What about Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov? They're also your parents. So you'll say, well, that's more a mocker rochik. It's many generations, and the gene pool has mixed up many, many times. My point is, when you say the word source, that too is like a word that needs to be explained. What do you mean by source? So he's saying here, that's what he's distinguishing. Source as in direct source, where you could say this originated here, or you could say it emerged from somewhere where ultimately, if you didn't have a nefesh, obviously you wouldn't have seichel. If you weren't born with a soul, a body doesn't have intelligence on its own, a corpse, God forbid. So it all comes from there. just to give again some language of understanding, different ways of understanding the word source and coming from somewhere.
Can we say that nefesh that we understand in a real world is like a wellspring on the earth, and nefesh that we are talking about in its potential is like, as you said, source in a source of the source, like as you said, like electricity that make is a collection, but it's not the collection in a with the borders, but the collection as a source.
I mean, I used the example of wellspring and electricity in my conversation today. You could say it all with certain qualifications. I would not call a nefesh any of that. I would just say these electricity, or what I spoke about now, with the depths of the earth, are examples to understand how something can originate from somewhere sort. But I wouldn't use that as an example for a nefesh. A nefesh is a soul, is a spirit, it's just good examples to help us understand aspects. Remember, he's not even talking about the nefesh here, the etzema nefesh. We're talking about Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi. We're talking about the koach in the nefesh, not necessarily the nefesh itself. We didn't even talk about that yet.
So there are nefesh and nefesh. We have nefesh in each of us, and it's different that we're talking about right now. Not different, but the original, the original for all nefesh. That
He's not talking about that right now. He's talking about the faculties right now. There's the revealed faculties, there's the hidden faculties, the hidden spheres. He's trying to explain the difference between a concealed state that exists and a helam she'eina b'mitzias, and a concealed state that does not exist. That's the scope of what we're discussing now. We're not talking about the soul itself and different souls and all this root of all the souls. That's not at all the conversation here at this point.
When you said the conception,
okay.
we learned that the idea, once it's appeared in this world, can be get separately with another person. The idea already existing means that it's already here, and then it can be.
Yeah, I spoke about an idea that you're conscious of. There's an idea that's inside your mind, but you're not conscious of presently, but it's concealed. And then there's the power of conceiving new ideas. And now there's a level that gives what he calls Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi. Within the nefesh, there's the power of the power to conceive ideas. That's what he's discussing here.
Okay.
Is that what you're? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Everybody, look, as I said, the focus here should be, these are the levels, and it's going to take work. You have to find good examples to try to understand how these levels work. I try to give a few of them. I'm sure there are many, many more. And that's that. So now, let's go back. All this was a mushal. All this was to help us understand the 10 hidden spheres. So now he says,
but the Koach Hiuli HaAtzmi is already a mocker. We spoke about something
he
before.
just said
that.
it's not a mocker, it's nimtza memenu. So when you say mocker,
I understand.
You have to use
the
Rebbe
Koach
Rasham's words.
Hiuli HaAtzmi or something above the Koach Hiuli.
He doesn't speak about Koach above. He just said Koach Hiuli HaAtzmi. He didn't go higher than that. Here, for the purposes of this discussion, he didn't go beyond that. Okay? Ukamoy kain hu esses Sefiros hagnuzes. And based on what we just learned, so too are the 10 hidden spheres. Shein bechinis helam she'einan b'mitzias. They're not actual spheres, like the revealed spheres. They're a helam that are not in existent state. The comparison first was the Flintstone, and now in the human, in the nefesh, it's the Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi. Not higher than the Koach HaMaskil, the power to conceive. That's Sefiros hagnuzes. So he finished explaining how the 10 hidden spheres are not yet actual spheres. But he's going to continue now and go even further, which is going to bring us more to Lifnei Tzimtzum, which we can still say the Sefiros hagnuzes that he described here sound like after the Tzimtzum. Because even though they're not a Metzias, but he did call it like a Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi. So let's see what he's going to say now. Omnam, however, b'mokem acher, elsewhere it's explained, mavur, she'ein Metzias l'gnuzes. That the hidden spheres, there's no Metzias altogether. Here he said it's not Metzias HaSechel, the Koach HaSechel Hiuli. The Koach HaMaskil is not a Metzias of an idea, but it's still in the category of Sechel, like he said. The Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi is still called Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi. Now he's saying the 10 hidden spheres is not a Metzias altogether. V'hainu, says the Rebbe Rafsha, she'einam nimtzoyim b'metzias klal. They're totally non-existent. So now we're talking about Sefiros hagnuzes as being a concept, the real concept, as we're going to soon learn. Till now, we were using that word because that's a word we've been using. But the truth is, when you say that the nefesh has this capacity, what's called Koach HaSechel Hiuli HaAtzmi, it's not purely a concept. There is a nefesh. The nefesh is in existence. And the nefesh has within it the capacity of these faculties. It's just that it's removed from the faculties and they emerge from it instead of it being a direct source. But you can't say the nefesh doesn't exist. We're not talking about God envisioning the soul. We're talking about an actual soul that has these strengths within it. It's power, these powers. Now you're saying that Sefiros hagnuzes are totally non-existent. And he says like this: V'zeu ha'hefresh bein Sefiros hagnuzes le'Sefiros hagluyos. This is the difference between the revealed spheres, the hidden spheres, and the revealed spheres. The Sefiros hagluyos harihem tamid nimtzoyim b'metzias. The 10 revealed spheres are always in a state of existence. Gam bizman she'enim poelim pulosa. Even when they're not functioning. Like, even if they're not actually activated, they still exist. Ubederech klal. And in general, ha'esser spheres tamid poelim pulosa. And generally, the 10 spheres are always doing their job. Because the energy and vitality of existence is from chesed. If chesed would stop flowing for 1 second, you wouldn't have existence. So in that sense, they're always activated. And the same thing is with creation, not just the vitality. It comes from Sefiros HaChesed, like it says Hagdula. Gdula is Chesed. Hagvura, Hagdula. So Gdula is called in some places Chesed. This is Ma'aseh Bereishis. Ubefrat HaChayeshu mebchinas HaChesed. That's creation in general, and specifically the vitality that maintains the world is from the Chesed. And what's Gvura? V'Gvura hu lahayli mesa'er sheyuchel liyas yisavos mebchinas mitzias. And Gvura, this is all the revealed spheres. Gvura is the effort to conceal the energy in order to make sure it's tailored to allow existence to be a mitzias. Because if the chesed was without any filtering and without any channeling, it would overwhelm existence. So you need Gvura to channel it. V'chein nesen mida v'gvul ala eir, and Gvura also gives a measure and parameters to the energy. V'efen sheyuchel iskabel be'elamus. So let me correct myself. I use that to explain the first one. He's saying two things, Gvura. One is to conceal the eir, because if the eir was completely revealed, we couldn't exist. The second is to measure the eir and tailor it to fit into and be able to be received by the world. It's 2 points. One is concealment and one is channeling, so to speak. V'hateferes, a third sphere of the Sefiros is hu ha'iskalus. Teferes we know is the middle path. It makes a perfect balance and harmony between Chesed and Gvura. So these are all active spheres. The truth is, before he said, even when it's not active, they still exist. But then he said, but derech klal, in general, they're always active. So what did he mean by the fact that they exist even when they're not? Because there are certain elements, they're not always active. They're not every detail of the spheres is always in motion. Even though, like he said, in general, they are. V'hashpah hi al yedei nehi. And the next three spheres, Netzach Yisayid, is the hashpah that takes Chesed Gvura Teferes and brings it into, like so-called the behavioral, into the actionable. So even the Chesed Gvura Teferes are the three main forces that create. Nehi is its manifestation, the hashpah. So haripilolosam hitmidis. So we see from this that their function is constant, because you constantly need this in order to keep existence in place. So what did he mean before that they exist even when they're not functioning? He says, Acha inyan shenimtsoim tamid. However, this inyan that they're constantly there, hainu shemitziusim ein rak mitzad pu'ulasam. The point what he wants to make is that their existence is not only due to their function. Ki mitziusim u'mitzad atzman. They're actually entities that are functional. It's not just there, because there are places that says the Sefiros only are there for functional purposes. There's no actual independent spheres. There is an opinion like that by Mukabalim. But Chassidus is now, he's emphasizing here the Shita, that the spheres are actual entities, and they're not just defined by their functions, they have functions, but they're entities. Just like a human being, we're not just Sechel and Midas when we're functioning using our mind is there even when we're not using it. It's an existing faculty within the being, human being. And which means that what? The Husha Netzalu Eses Sefiros Me'eren Sef HaMaitzil. So this means, because the 10 spheres were emanated from the emanator, from God. Umitzad Zeh Umitziyusam. So God actually emanated 10 spheres. Just like he imparted from Moshe Rabbeinu's spirit, Ruach HaSha'alecha, onto the Shivim Skenim, the 70 sages, he actually imparted the spirit. So God actually imparted actual attributes, which are actual spheres that have functions. And in general, those functions are ongoing, but they're more than just functions. They are actually entities. And what's now all this elaboration, let me explain why he's elaborating, because he wants to explain the distinction between that and the hidden spheres, which we'll soon learn are not existent at all. So then why we call them hidden spheres, obviously, is going to be the question. So he's going to explain, this is where names are going to come into play soon. So he's going to say like this, so why taka do you need these spheres? The intention in imparting these spheres, something we discussed many times. It's in order for us to have a connection with God, a relationship. If there were no spheres, God is beyond lav iyu inun midus inun klal. He's completely beyond any attributes, we know. God is completely apart from everything, seamless, shapeless. Where would we have a common ground? So Hashem imparted Chochmeh, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Yisayid, Malchus. So now we have a place to connect with. So just as God, we connect by learning Torah, we connect with God's wisdom. By being Balei Chesed, doing kindness, we connect with God's kindness. The Luli Sefiros Eina Be'erech Shanasham Mitiskasher B'Atzmos Ein Sof. Without the 10 spheres, it would not be possible, without a miracle, meaning in a way that we could understand, Ein be'erech, that the soul, how could the soul to connect to Atzmus Ein Sof? Because Atzmus Ein Sof is so beyond anything that's in our structured existence. Once the Esser spheres emanated, now there can be a connection of the neshama. Now you could ask, 1 second, is the neshama rooted in the highest levels, even higher than the spheres? Yes, that's true. But that's just a fact. The question is, how would we connect to that in a way that we're conscious of it without God just forcing it upon us, or kol yachol? How do we logically connect? That's why we need to learn Torah, do mitzvahs, be kind, and follow and emulate God's ways. So that's how neshama consciously connects through the Esser spheres. The gam, and additionally, besides connection, also b'chdesh yedias Ein Sof. This is one of the places that I often refer to. Why the 10 spheres, they help us experience God, skashus, connect to God, and also to understand, to have a idea and understanding Ein Sof, understanding how God works. Like the Zohar says, created existence in order they should be known. That through existence, God should be known. How can we know God? Because God infused into existence the 10 spheres, including Chochmah Bina Das. So we have Chochmah Bina Das, and we can then understand the way God created, the way God works. The Atzmus Ein Sof, the core of Ein Sof, Ein Begeder Yediyah, is completely not in the realm of knowledge. Knowledge is already a parameter, a structure. Shulamayla b'chinas gili, because Atzmus Ein Sof is higher than any form of revelation and expression. Ubes spheres shayich yediyah, and the 10 spheres there we're capable of having awareness or yediyah, knowledge. And once we have that stepping stone, we then from there we can extrapolate and know Ein Sof higher than Atzilus. You may recall, well, those back in volume 1, he spoke about this at length, how the Sefiros first help us understand divine attributes, but then they help us understand the level of the divine that's beyond the attributes, even higher than Atzilus. That's why Sefiros have 3 meanings. From the word number, mispar, so that gives you more the structural, the number. 2, from the word sipur, it tells the story, the narrative of God. Like the mispar would be more understanding and looking at the art and the structure of the art. Sipur tells us the story of the artist. What is God like? And finally, there's the 3rd meaning, sapir, from the word even sapir, like a sapphire stone that's transparent and reveals to us the God that's beyond existence altogether. But even sipur, he discussed, can tell us both the story, the revealed story, and also the hidden story. But this is all connected to the divine as it connects. This is all what Sefiros Hagaluyas do. The Atzilus hu Shmoi Shala Ein Sof. So Atzilus, therefore, is compared to Shmoi, the name of the Ein Sof, like a name, u'kamei beis yad, like a handle. What's a beis yad? To hold a pitcher without a handle, you can't hold it. So Atzilus serves like a handle. Through that we can grasp the keli. Same thing here. Atzilus giving us the handles of the Sefiros, gives us a handle to understand that which is higher than Atzilus. And same thing with Esser spheres, you're able to have a connection of the soul and Atzmus Ein Sof in addition to Yediyah. Shar Dalid or Shar Ayin Dalid, Seif Peder Gimel. I think it's Shar Dalid. Seif Peder Gimel or Shar Yutes, Seif Peder Kalef. So the Pardes of the Ramak explains this there at length. So all this comes to tell us, V'hainu, she'esser spheres and b'chinas mitzias mitzad atzma. So this clearly tells us the 10 spheres are actual a mitzias on their own, not just their function. No, they're not just funnels. They're actual entities. Avala esser spheres hagnuzes, you have to say means that. But by contrast, the 10 hidden spheres, ein b'chinas mitzias mitzad atzma. They're not an entity of their own. On their own, they're not Metzias at all. What are they? Rak hein b'chinas shemes levad. They're just names. They're just descriptions. So this takes us back to what we're learning in Ayin Beis now, in volume 3. They're names. The Sefiros of Atzilus, the revealed, are not just names. They're actual faculties. They're faculties, they're attributes. Here, just names. Like, for example, the name of a person. Koach, rather. Before you call him by name, the name is not there, Koach. Why does he say Koach? Because I think by a human being that the name does carry the power of the soul, so there's something there. But not in any active way. Why would a person need a name? He actually qualifies that in a second. Why would he need a name? The name is only for him to be called by someone. He's talking by Adam now, not by Hashem. By a person, you can't say it doesn't exist at all, a name, because due to the core soul in its root and source, or at least the gili of the nefesh, that name is connected. So he says either one or two ways. Either because the etzem soul has at its core a name, or because of the gili to bring it down into some form of expression of life, you need to call him by a name. The name is like the channel for that energy. But nevertheless, even though you'll say that, that's more because God made it that way, that the name of a person carries his vitality. But there's no name within the nefesh like Koach. Koach, the faculties of a person originate from the soul. The name does not. The name is an additional element. It's not Metzias b'nefesh sheheim boi b'chinas Metzias. Metzias, again, he does not mean defined faculties, but the power of those faculties. Uvekama shenafshit mehem, shenafshit esam. And as much as you strip the faculties from any of their identity, meaning going all the way back even to the Koach HaKlulim b'nefesh, Megeder HaMetzias hariheim mekol mokim b'chinas Metzias b'nefesh. At the end of the day, you have to say there's a Metzias of them in the nefesh, even if you completely abstract and strip them from any form of definition, a structure or parameters. Mashenk and Hashem she'ein b'chinas Metzias b'nefesh. By contrast, the name does not exist within the nefesh at all. It's an additional element that God made in order to be able to connect the soul to the body, the etzem hashama, or the gili, like he just said. Okay, let me stop right here. We read a lot here, and obviously, he's saying all this about a human being. I think, if I recall correctly, he's going to qualify by the Eibishter. You can't even say this, because a name is not there altogether, originally. But we'll see how he explains it, because a name is a form of expression. But bottom line is, what he's leading to is to come to explain how the 10 spheres are like the revealed spheres are like 10 faculties. So yes, in the deeper parts of the soul, they don't have any shape and form and no identity, but they exist. There's a nefesh, they exist. You can't call them non-existent. And in the Sefiros Hagnuzis, he's going to say they're only like names. And names don't exist in that level. It's just a name, it's just an archetype, not even archetype. It's a name, it's a description. In other words, it's the concept of what will later become the 10 spheres, as we've learned that. But we'll wait to see how he spells this out as we go on. I just want to know whether I should stop. I'm trying to see, there's so much here. He goes on about the names. But we said we would do this to help us understand what we're learning in Ayin Beis Chelik Gimel. I just want to see 1 second if I finished a full phrase, or we need to read more. 1 second. Okay, this needs more discussion, of course, and that's going to take place in the next few pages here. But let me stop here firstly for any questions. Maybe we'll just stop the class also here. Go ahead. Anybody want to ask anything?
I'm a little confused because I thought, we were going back here to help understand God and his Smo Hagadol and how his expression, how he goes from being just himself, just only existence
Well, that's
as
one of the
himself.
reasons that's one of the reasons I was hesitating whether to learn this, because I knew it's going to open up a whole bunch of other points and discussions. So the only thing I could say is I have to wait till he finishes. He hasn't finished yet. We're in middle. And when we finish, it'll all become clear and it'll be very consistent with what we've learned. Right now, yes, it seems like a shame is different than what we learned in volume 3. That only appears that way. It's not going to be the conclusion.
I'll wait. Thank you.
Yeah. There's always the risk when you go back to something, because here, remember, volume 2 he was discussing a different point altogether.
Rabbi, I'd like to ask a question. I don't mean to interrupt, but you say 10 spheres, but you include Da'at in that. And I'm just wondering, isn't Da'at the 11th sphere? And so is there not 11?
I'm saying, what include what?
He means Das.
Yeah, but we're not talking about Kesser. So when you don't count Kesser, you count Das.
But why don't you count Keter?
That's not for his. It's a whole different discussion.
But and my other question to understand is that you said if Chesed were to stop flowing, right? You mentioned if Chesed were to stop flowing, but intrinsically through the Sefirot and the ore that's flowing through the Sefirot, all of them have to be flowing at once.
Okay, so.
No, because you had mentioned, and I didn't ask the question when, but you said if Chesed were to stop flowing, and you had said that the other Sefirot weren't flowing into each other as well, but they're all flowing all at once, correct?
Well, he broke it down how it is. He said Chesed is the flow of divine energy. Gvura is like more the concealment and the tail and the channeling of it.
Okay.
The Sefiros encompasses them, and they all work together in creating existence.
From my understanding,
what's that? Yeah, so the answer is correct. They all work together.
From my understanding, at least from what I've learned and what I've discovered, is that Da'at is only activated when Chesed, Chachma and Bina are merged together with Keter, and the only way that Keter is activated is when it is of Malchut.
Firstly, this completely different discussion, completely not relevant to here at all. He didn't talk about that. He didn't talk about Keser, frankly. So it's not part of this. It's a good discussion, but it's nothing to do with what we learned here.
Okay.
He didn't even talk about Chachma and Bina for that matter, actually. He just started with Chesed.
Chesed is an attribute of Bina.
So I'm saying what you're bringing up is a topic, but it's a topic that's outside of this scope of what we're discussing here. It's a good topic, and there's a whole discussion about Dat and Keser, of when you count one, when you count the other.
Okay, and I do apologize. My last is that from my understanding too, some kelim remain intact while others, when the ore flows through them, have exploded but still are able to contain the light. Correct?
Explode. You're talking now about Sefiros HaKelim of Tayu?
From what I'm asking is
where did you hear about explosion? We didn't. It's not what we learned here.
That the vessels that intrinsically the vessels that hold the light, that when the simsim occurs and the ore flows through Keter into the other Sefirot, some vessels are able to hold and stay intact, while
also has nothing to do with what we're learning here.
Okay.
So it would be good. My suggestion is it would be worthwhile if you had a conversation with someone who's familiar with these ideas, and they could discuss it. But what you're discussing is, you may have heard in other classes. It's perfectly fine, but it's nothing and not related to anything we've been learning here.
Thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. So I would read on, but the thing is, you see, if you go continue, this is going now another good page and a half, probably, or a page at least, where he's going to talk about Shemus more in detail. So, as I said, we should hold off before we come to any conclusions. It'll become pretty clear soon. It's just he's covering more details here. Obviously, you can feel free to read on. I'm going to stop here at the bottom of 869. I said we'll probably go, I'm not going to go further than page 872. So we're talking about another 3 pages. Good. So let's stop here. Bottom of 869, middle of the concept of names. I'm going to stop the recording here, okay?